Hello, good afternoon. This is BBC News with me, Ben Brown. Our latest headlines. There are long queues as shops reopen today. The government encourages people to go out and spend sensibly. Non-essential stores and shoppers in England are preparing for a new way of doing business.
I can't wait. First time in ages, apart from supermarkets I've been into. So looking forward to it.
Love it. Love it. I haven't been on lockdown because I work for the NHS, but it's so nice for the shops to finally be open.
But there is chaos in some places as social distancing rules are ignored in the rush for a bargain. The Prime Minister says he's setting up a commission to look into racial inequality. He says he's been influenced by the images of Black Lives Matter protests.
We have to acknowledge that when thousands of people march peacefully for Black Lives Matter, you can't ignore that. I, as a leader, as someone in government, I can't ignore the strength of their feeling.
Wearing a face covering is now compulsory for anyone travelling on public transport in England, with a £100 fine if you don't. Hello, very good afternoon to you. In around half an hour's time, we'll be bringing you today's coronavirus press briefing from Downing Street. Today it's led by the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab. First, though, a quick look at today's main developments. And queues have been forming outside some shops in England as those selling non-essential goods welcome back customers after 3 months. A further 4 people have died in Wales after testing positive for COVID-19. No further deaths in Scotland have been announced in the last 24 hours. Zoos and safari parks have also reopened today in England, and some secondary pupils in years 10 and 12 have gone back to school. Also in England, you're now allowed to go to places of worship for individual prayers. Now, various countries across Europe have started reopening their borders today. France has announced that travel to other European countries will now be allowed. And Beijing has recorded 36 new locally transmitted coronavirus cases amid fears of a second wave in the Chinese capital. First, on the reopening of those shops in England, let's get this report now from our Consumer Affairs correspondent Sarah Corker, who reports from County Durham.
The shoppers are back. The queue for Sports Direct in Bishop Auckland stretched all the way across the market square.
How do you feel about being able to shop again?
I've got my mask, so I can't wait. First time in ages, apart from supermarkets I've been into. So looking forward to it.
Have you missed coming down to the high street?
Not really, no. It saved me a lot of money.
Love it. Love it. I haven't been on lockdown because I work for the NHS, but it's so nice for the shops to finally be open.
After 12 long weeks in enforced hibernation, thousands of high streets across England are coming back to life.
How does it feel having the doors open again?
Oh, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Today is a bit of a trial run. We don't know what's going to happen.
Really excited, but nervous at the same time.
Small independent retailers believe lockdown has encouraged more people to shop locally, a trend they hope continues.
I think we just need to keep encouraging our customers, let them know that it's safe to come into shops again, making sure that we all have our safety measures in place so that our customers and our staff are confident when they come into the shop.
The shopping experience may feel a bit strange. Some stores will have a one-in, one-out policy. There's hand sanitizer at the door, one-way systems. Customers are asked to browse with their eyes only, keep touching to a minimum. Expect to see lots of plastic screens. People are asked to shop alone and to pay by contactless.
And the restrictions haven't put people off. Thousands waited for Primark to open in Bradford, Birmingham, Liverpool, and this is Bristol. The chain doesn't trade online and there's pent-up demand. On London's Oxford Street, there was a scrum to get into Nike Town, the crowd ignoring social distancing rules. And in Ashford in Kent, a steady stream of customers, but clothes shopping will be different.
Some of the clothes that you do try on, if you try them on, they're then quarantined. Some of the fitting rooms are actually closed, and brands are extending the returns policy.
But some retailers warn it just won't be profitable to trade with social distancing measures in place. The government say this is a phased path to recovery.
It's about coming back to the shops a second and third time that's going to allow our economy to open. The 2 metre rule is there today. There is a comprehensive review, but it's always going to be based on that best health advice.
Elsewhere in the UK, non-essential shops opened in Northern Ireland last week. There is still no date for Wales and Scotland. The high street was already struggling before the virus struck, and the big unknown is after this initial rush, will customers return in the numbers needed to help the high street bounce back? Sarah Corker, BBC News in County Durham.
Well, we're going to talk about that very issue. How will all this affect the high street in the months and years ahead? What's been the impact on the retail sector? How can it move forward post-lockdown? Let's talk now to the entrepreneur, former Dragon's Den investor, Theo Paphitis, who's chairman of Ryman's. Thank you very much for being with us. Well, first of all, is this a day you welcome? The non-essential shops in England reopening, shoppers able at last to get back into the shops?
Need to reopen Britain. We've been shut now for such a long time. Retail has been devastated. But walking out the streets today and seeing the number of people out there, my God, I was so pleased.
Were you surprised how many people were out there? Because, some people have said in opinion polls and surveys, actually, they're quite nervous. They're not sure they want to go back out into the shops.
Well, we're all waiting for today with trepidation, really. We really didn't know. Nobody knew. But they're out there. They're voting with their feet and their purses and wallets. And the important thing is, as long as everybody is alert and aware of the situation at the moment, and we're seeing this. Listen, this 2 metre rule is neither here or there, because the World Health Organization, as you know, are happy with 1 metre. So it's one man's opinion against another. But the reality is, it doesn't matter, because what I've seen today is people are aware. Some are wearing masks, they're stepping back, they're waiting for people to go through before they pass through. So they are totally aware of the situation.
Of course, they have been shopping throughout the lockdown, but they've been shopping online. And is your worry that that is going to tilt everything towards online even more than it was already going that way?
Well, that's always been the case. And I do actually believe that it will never be the same again. There will be more people converted to online from where they were previously. But this is a consumer economy. Great Britain survives on the spending of consumers and consumer demand. So we must make sure that we don't see loads of unintended consequences by the fact that we don't allow the economy to grow and get back on its feet.
And would you be saying to people, support your local shops in particular, get out there and do shopping locally?
Listen, we've got lots of convenience stores, Ryman, Robert Dars, we're in the local high streets, and we've always supported the local community, and they've always supported us. People will go to what suits them. Now they have various choices. They've got our local stores, they've still got obviously the out-of-town shopping centres, and they've got the internet. The important thing is that people start getting back to some normality so we can start Great Britain going again.
Well, normality you say, but frankly, a lot of shops won't have survived this lockdown, unfortunately, and we are going to see more shops boarded up, aren't we? And it's not very attractive to go down a high street where a lot of shops are boarded up. What are your overall thoughts for the future of the high street? I know we've talked about it many times in the past, but it's even more urgent now with the lockdown.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is nothing to do with COVID. This has been happening for many, many years. We've had some very unfair taxation going on in the United Kingdom. We've had online retailers not paying the same level of tax as physical retailers. The business rate is a ridiculous, antiquated taxation that really needs to be abolished to give the high streets and give physical retailing a good chance.
And what about rents, landlords' rents? I mean, I know a lot of shops complain about that they're too high, they can't make any money.
Well, you know what? There's a thing called supply and demand. Now, you can negotiate with landlords. You can't negotiate with the Exchequer on business rates. So that's the first one that we've got to deal with. Supply and demand and commerciality deals with the other. We've already seen some landlords take a very pragmatic approach to what's happening out there. And some have still got to wake up. You all know who you are. But every supply and demand and commerciality will deal with this.
Theo, great to talk to you. Theo Paphitis there, Chairman of Ryman's and former Dragon's Den investor. Many thanks indeed for your perspective. And let's now talk about Fortnum & Mason's food hall, which has been open for some time now. But today, the rest of the store was opened up to shoppers. And joining me now is their Chief Executive Officer, Ewan Venters. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. How's it gone today? Tell us.
Good afternoon. Fantastic. It was a really encouraging start. We did open on May the 21st, and we've seen the recovery of customer confidence that Fortnum's build each and every day. But to see London a bit more alive today, seeing a lot more traffic around the area, is definitely benefiting the store. So good to see.
And would you like all of this to have been done before, or do you think this timing is about right?
I think the timing is about right. Look, you know, the safety of our staff, the safety of our customers is of paramount importance. So I've never been one to push the unlock, really. I think the timing had to be right. I think the biggest issue now that preoccupies us is the social distancing rules of the 2 metre, especially with our restaurants. You know, our restaurants, which represents 25% of our business, aren't scheduled to reopen until July the 4th. If they open with a 2 metre rule, it will make doing business really hard. But equally, that's got to be done when we believe it's right and safe for our employees and for our customers. So I'm all in favour of doing business. But, you know, in the great scheme of life, you know, these 12 weeks is a 12, maybe a 16-week blip in our history. You know, we've got to do the right thing by the health and welfare of our customers and staff, and then business will rebuild.
So would you add your voice to those saying, let's scrap that 2 metre rule? It's a bit excessive. You know, the World Health Organization rule is 1 metre. Other countries have 1 metre. Maybe it's time to ditch that for the sake of British business.
Absolutely. I've been very vocal already in my support to move to the 1 metre distance. I believe it's the right thing to do. I'd actually, frankly, not open restaurants on July the 4th until if it was still deemed unsafe, and therefore 2 metres had to stay in place. So, you know, I think we should open the restaurants when it's appropriate to move to a 1 metre social distance rule. I have a store and a restaurant in Hong Kong that's never closed throughout the entire pandemic. And we've managed our business beautifully in that period through sensible and thoughtful consideration between the customer and the staff operating in the store. And as you well know, the number of cases, the number of deaths in Hong Kong is 4, and the number of COVID-19 cases reported is about 1,100, 1,200. So a very manageable situation, and we can manage on that basis as well.
But it's one thing reopening restaurants, and we've talked about this before. It's another thing whether people will actually have the confidence to go back to a restaurant. Is it an experience you want to have in these times of coronavirus?
Do you know, I think that over the last 20 years, the percentage of the food pounds that's now spent outside the home in restaurants has increased from maybe 27, 28 pence in the pound to nearly 50 pence in the pound. You know, we are social creatures. And I believe that actually there's a huge pent-up desire to get back into restaurants and start engaging, creating a reunion moment with your friends and family. People want to do that safely, but people want to do it. We've opened up a reservations book for our famous afternoon tea here in the store and our restaurant 45 Jermyn Street. And already we're seeing a strong demand for advanced booking. So I've got a sneaky feeling, Ben, you know, business will be back. People are yearning to get back together again. Just do it in a safe way.
All right, really good to talk to you, and very good luck with all of your enterprises. Ewan Venters, their Chief Executive Officer of Fortnum & Mason. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Going to take you to the United States now, because crowds are gathering at the moment at the Georgia State Capitol building in Atlanta as the protests continue over the death of an African-American man on Friday. This was Rayshard Brooks, who was shot in an encounter with 2 white police officers in a restaurant car park, and a medical examiner has declared it was homicide. Well, Mr. Brooks's family have been speaking at a news conference. Let's have a listen to what they've had to say.
Rayshard Brooks. The name that may start a protest tomorrow or another day in the future. However, the man himself no longer has a future. He can no longer live in the present nor plan for tomorrow. No matter what the different points of view are ours of his death, we must all agree to one fact. The fact that he was killed by the Atlanta Police Department. The fact that someone's cousin, brother, uncle, nephew, father, companion, and friend is no longer in this world. The trust that we have with the police force is broken. And the only way to heal some of these wounds is through a conviction and a drastic change with the police department. But honestly, true justice will never prevail, because we will never be able to bring back Rayshard Brooks. He will no longer be able to return to this world, nor to his family. However, again, if we stand together and united as one, there will be no more cases similar to Rayshard's. How many more protests will it take to ensure that the next victim isn't your cousin, your brother, your uncle, your nephew, your friend, or your companion, so that we can finally end the suffering of police excessive force? We are tired. Guys, we're tired. And we are frustrated. Most importantly, we're heartbroken. So we need justice for Rayshard Brooks.
This is Mr. Brooks's cousin. His name is Mr. Allen.
I'm gonna try to make this brief and clear. First and foremost, we want to say, want to show our appreciation and thanks to everybody that's been out here supporting us and helping us. And we encourage you to continue to do so. And I actually go by the name of Decatur Red. A lot of people know me as that. And a lot of celebrities I see that have been trying to reach out and try to find the family. We are the family. I am the family. And if you're trying to help, you know, reach out to me so we can try to make sure that my cousin and his wife and his kids is taken care of. If you can't help financially, then try to just keep help with your voice and stay with the protests. But again, I want to just tell you that we appreciate all the help. We appreciate the voices around the nation. We thank you.
As y'all know, I'm Attorney Chris Stewart.
Well, that's just an excerpt from that news conference there. A family of Rayshard Brooks, who was shot in an encounter with 2 white police officers in a restaurant car park in Atlanta, and that has sparked off more protests in the United States. Now here, wearing a face covering is now compulsory for anyone travelling on public transport in England. Those failing to wear one could be fined up to £100. The new regulations do not apply in Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland, where officials are only recommending that people wear them. Our correspondent Danny Savage has been at York Station for us with the latest.
I mean, this is all quite strange, really. I've been reporting on the coronavirus outbreak since we had the first 2 confirmed cases here in York back at the end of January. But for the first time in nearly 5 months, this is only the first time that I've had to publicly wear a face mask. And that's because LNER are asking people to wear them in the station concourse as well as on the trains as well. Now, when the trains come in, it is obvious that 3 out of 4 seats are cordoned off. Nobody can sit in them. So they're very much restricted on capacity. There aren't many passengers at the moment, but we've been talking to some of them and staff, about how they're coping with these new regulations. For anybody using public transport in England, this is now the compulsory look. Passengers at York Station have got the message. Here you're encouraged to wear a mask anywhere inside the station, not just on services. Feelings about the rule are mixed.
It's very odd. I don't know how busy they're going to be today, but when I've been catching trains before, I've been on my own on the train, so it's not felt particularly necessary to wear a mask. Although I do understand why we need to wear them.
It's really strange because I've never done it before, but yeah, actually it's quite normal, I think, with the current situation, so yeah.
The protection actually offers is very little, and wearing the same face mask throughout the day offers even less protection. So, but I think it gives a reassurance to a lot of people.
But one traveller said not all her fellow passengers were abiding by the new rule.
And I said to him, excuse me, but you should have a mask on, and he just laughed. And I said, well, I don't think it's funny. You need to be wearing your mask. So I told one of the police officers, well, I pointed him out. I said, that guy has come further than me. I came on a lead and he's had no mask on.
This issue once again highlights the disparities in rules across the UK. This train is heading up to Edinburgh. Anybody on it at the moment has to wear a face covering. It's mandatory. But as soon as it gets north of the border above Berwick, it's only an advisory. So you could take your mask off. At Manchester Piccadilly Station this morning, the hush of the rush hour was still noticeable. But the feeling was that people are going along with it.
Safety of our staff is absolutely paramount, so we would never want our staff to be in any situation where they're putting themselves at risk. But really, we're trying to work with passengers to encourage and explain the reasons for wearing the masks, and so far we've seen really good response and really good uptake.
In London, transport police were handing out some masks to people who didn't have them. Much more cleaning is also taking place in between trips. And it's not just trains and tubes. Bus passengers in England must wear face coverings too. We've got to get used to this. Danny Savage, BBC News, York.
Well, the government's been urged to publish a review into the 2-metre social distancing rule before the 4th of July. That is when hospitality venues could potentially begin to reopen in England. Now, Downing Street says the review into the rule implemented to stop the spread of the coronavirus will be completed in the coming weeks, but would not be drawn on whether it would be finished by the time that pubs and restaurants in England are due to reopen. Well, precisely how much distance you should leave between you and other people does actually vary between country and country. Spain and Canada implement the same 2-metre rule as we have here in the United Kingdom, but that drops to 1.5 metres if you're in Australia or Italy or Germany. And then it further reduces to 1 metre if you're in France, Denmark or Singapore. Meanwhile, official guidance from the World Health Organization is to leave at least 1 metre, so around 3 feet, between you and others to prevent the spread of the virus. Well, we speak now to Dr. Hans Kluge, who is from the World Health Organization. He's their director for Europe. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So there's a lot of debate in this country on whether to reduce that 2-metre rule down to 1 metre. Would you accept that we could do that now?
So the WHO recommendation, based on the current knowledge of how the droplets are being transmitted, is minimum 1 metre between individuals. But then it's up to the country to look at the feasibility and the settings, but minimum 1 metre is a recommendation as of today.
So it's up to the country. OK, well, that's clear. Now, you have said that the UK remains in, quote, a very active phase of the pandemic, but we are seeing an easing of the lockdown. We've got shops in England, non-essential shops, reopening today. Do you think that is happening too soon, if you're right, and we're still in a very active phase of the pandemic?
Well, to lift the lockdown is as important as to consider to impose a lockdown. The objective of a lockdown is, on one hand, to slow down the spread of the disease, and the other hand, to buy time for the health system and public health services to cope with the situation. So there are a number of criteria. The key issue is that this has to be driven by public health and epidemiological data. But we also understand that it's a balance between social and economic consequences, protection of population health, and well-being of the population.
So in other words, you accept it is essentially in the end a political decision about how and when to ease your lockdown?
Absolutely, it's a political decision, but to be driven by health considerations. And the UK has a lot of very intelligent people. I'm in constant contact or regular contact with the colleagues over there, including the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Whitty, who is an excellent professional. What is important is to have an aggressive track, test and tracing system in place. Number two, community engagement, because ultimately it's the behavior of the people who will determine the course of the epidemic, and no complacency.
And you say a very aggressive test and trace system. Do you believe that in this country we now have that? Because I think you have doubted that.
Well, what I see is that the testing capacity is being beefed up, and also the system of contact tracing is becoming much more sophisticated. I believe that the first results are coming in as of last week, and we're very much looking forward to the system further being fine-tuned.
The Prime Minister was saying it's going to be world-beating.
Well, we definitely would be very keen to further be part of it, and I have full confidence that the country is managing.
And just briefly, what would you say about the spread of the pandemic globally? We are seeing quite alarming figures, especially in Brazil, for example, which has now got the second highest number of fatalities in the world after the United States.
Yes, we have, let's say, generally speaking, two epicenters. One is Latin America, but also Europe, my Europe, meaning the 53 member states. I mean, we're very busy in Eastern Europe, for example, and then we always have to be very careful how to interpret the figures. For example, in Sweden, it's increasing, but this is because of the widening, expanding of the testing strategy. The key issue is no time for celebration, time for preparation.
All right. Good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy. Dr. Hans Kluge there, the World Health Organization Director for Europe.
Pleasure.
And we can also talk to our health correspondent, Lauren Moss, who joins me now. And Lauren, we've had the latest fatality figures from COVID-19 in the UK.
Yeah, these are the figures which are released daily by the Department of Health. And they've said today that there have been 38 further recorded deaths in the last 24 hours across the UK. In England, 28 further deaths. Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister for Scotland, said there were no new recorded deaths in Scotland today, but 38 across the UK as a total. And that now takes the total to 41,698. Yesterday there were 36, which was the lowest since the 21st of March. So the number of people dying is still declining, still coming down. 93,163 tests provided yesterday. So that is the lowest we've seen in some days. 1,056 people tested positive, and that is also a low number there too.
Just hearing from the World Health Organization Europe director there, who we were just talking to, saying that the pandemic here in the UK is still in a very active phase, although from the statistics you've just given us, and generally the statistics are all in the rightward direction. They're all falling.
Yes, I mean, I think it would be fair to say from what scientists are saying, what the government is saying, we're in quite a precarious position now going forward. We're starting to open up. We've seen shops in England, more shops are opening up today, and scientists will be watching very closely as to what happens with that rate of infection. We hear a lot about the R number, and that's the number of people who have the virus, how many people they then go on to infect. And, you know, that could be between 0.7, 0.9, or perhaps 0.8 to 1 in England. So they'll be keeping a very close eye on that over the next coming weeks to work out, you know, which social distancing measures appear to have the most effect. Of course, masks as well also came into be compulsory on public transport, and anyone going into hospital, and outpatients wearing masks today as well, face coverings, I should say, and it's hospital staff that will have to wear the actual surgical mask too. So we're slowly opening up in England, and those measures are still in place, but I think there'll be very close attention paid to what happens over the next 2 to 3 weeks as well as we head further into the summer. And of course the 4th of July as well being sort of circled as the earliest possible date for pubs and restaurants to possibly reopen there too.
OK, Lauren, many thanks indeed. We got that latest Downing Street coronavirus briefing coming up in just a couple of minutes. Let's in the meantime go to our chief political correspondent Vicky Young, who's at Westminster. And Vicky, the government will be relieved to have non-essential shops in England opening up, but still more pressure on them to relax that 2-metre rule.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you know, this week we're going to get the more unemployment figures coming out. The emphasis is very much turning to the economy, that recession that the Chancellor knows is coming, and what more they can do to try to mitigate all of that. And of course, part of it is to reopen and get people back to work. That's the crucial thing that they want to be focusing on as the health implications start to subside a little bit. And that 2-metre rule is absolutely crucial for so many pubs, restaurants, cafes who are told they might be able to open on the 4th of July. I think what they don't want to do is to prepare, rearrange, do all the work that there would have to be to try and open under those rules, only for them to be changed very close to the point where they can open. And I think that's what the government's weighing up. I mean, all along, ministers have wanted as much data, as much information as possible in order to make these decisions. And ultimately, the science is there, but they don't agree on it necessarily. As we know, lots of different countries are doing things differently. And in the end, it will be a political decision about how much risk they are willing to accept if they do reduce it from 2 metres to 1 metre, knowing that it does have an impact, but how much of an impact will it have? And will people feel safe to go back?
All right, Vicky, let's go to the Downing Street briefing.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's Downing Street press conference. Now, let me start with the daily update on the latest data on coronavirus. Today we had 1,056 new cases. There are 395 people in critical care and 38 people have very sadly died. I think it's also worth noting the week-on-week data, which compares Friday the 5th of June with Friday the 12th of June, just to give you a sense of the trend and the progress that we're making. There were, against the 5th of June versus the 12th of June, 109 fewer daily cases. There were 161 fewer patients in critical care in our hospitals and 155 fewer deaths. That's important progress on the week before as we continue step by step and week by week to bring the incidence of coronavirus down. In addition, as of today, there have been 6,866,481 tests for coronavirus carried out or posted out in the United Kingdom, and that includes 93,163 tests carried out or posted out yesterday. This is the progress, the evidence, the basis on which we're able to progress along the roadmap which the Prime Minister set out on the 11th of May. We're taking steady steps at each stage, and our progress is based on strict conditions, and we're very carefully monitoring the impact they have on the virus. And it's thanks to the hard work of the British people that we've seen the level of the virus brought down substantially. At the same time, we're watching the impact of every change that we make very closely so that we can monitor the trends and make sure that every step we take is as safe as possible. In terms of those steps, the most recent steps that we've taken, on Saturday, we took measures to allow individual prayer at places of worship. In order to support the loneliest and some of the most vulnerable in our society, we've also allowed single adult households to form support bubbles with one other household. And all of those in any support bubble are able to act as if they're living in the same household, including spending time in each other's homes without the requisite social distancing measures applying. And I know that these modest steps will provide enormous relief to many people who have been isolated from their loved ones for weeks on end now. Today we're taking further steps to reopen British high streets, to get our economy motoring again, to protect jobs and livelihoods. And we'll also allow outdoor attractions to open where people can stay in their cars, like safari parks and drive-in cinemas. As we explained back on the 11th of May, these are modest and careful steps. But with each step we take, we can monitor their effect on the transmission of COVID-19 in the country, keep the virus under control as we open up step by step, and build public confidence in the transition that we're making. And I say that because we can't just pretend that coronavirus has gone away or we've eliminated the virus. And we know from the science and also from what we're seeing from international experience that there is a risk of a second spike if we're not very careful at this moment in time. So we need to keep up the social distancing, we need to keep building up and reinforcing the test and tracing regime, and we need to continue our steady progress in repressing the virus as we try to get life back to something like normal. BEIS and the Treasury are working very closely with businesses, large and small, right across the country, so that they're able to meet the COVID-secure guidelines before they reopen. And just to give you a sense of what that will look like in practice, In local shops, as we've already seen with essential retail, you'll see one-way floor markings and signs, you'll see hand sanitising stations, and there will be limits on the number of people in any one shop at any one time. So it's very much a managed process. Starting today, we've also made it mandatory to wear a face covering when using public transport. And we also advise people to use a face covering in any place where they can't be sure that they'll be able to adhere to the social distancing guidelines. And at the same time today, we continue to incrementally bring more of our children back to school. We started with primary schools welcoming more children back on the 1st of June, and today secondary schools will start to provide some face-to-face time between teachers and students in years 10 and 12. So that's where we are as of today, and as I said, we'll monitor the effect of these changes very carefully. That's the way we can keep the downward pressure on coronavirus and build up public confidence, so we're in the best position that we possibly can be to take the third step along our roadmap, which will happen no earlier than the 4th of July. We're sticking to our plan, we're making good progress every week, and we'll only take the necessary next steps when we can be confident that it's safe to do so. Now I'll talk through the data slides that we have up on the screen. If I could have the first slide, please. So you can see from the first slide, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk through this data today is it can show the trend that I was talking about in my opening remarks. And the first slide shows cases confirmed with a test. So in total, we've got coming close to 7 million tests for coronavirus that have now been carried out or posted out in the UK, and that includes the 93,163 tests carried out or posted out yesterday. We can see also that nearly 300,000 people have tested positive, and that's just over 1,000 cases since yesterday. If I could have the second slide, please. Now, this shows the latest data from our hospitals. You can see that 430 people were admitted to hospital with coronavirus in England, Wales and Northern Ireland on the 12th of June. And that's down from 515 a week earlier and down from a peak of 3,432 back on the 1st of April. So you get a sense of the trend and the progress we're making. 395 COVID-19 patients were in mechanical ventilation beds in the UK on the 12th of June, and that's down from 556 a week earlier and down from a peak of over 3,000 on the 12th of April. If I could have the third slide, please. Now, this shows the regional breakdown for what's happening in our hospitals across the country. There are now 5,507 people in hospitals with coronavirus in the UK. That's down 19% from 6,826 a week ago and down from a peak of over 20,000 on the 12th of April. And as the graph shows, there's some regional variation, but most nations and most regions of the UK are broadly following a pretty similar pattern. And if I could have the final slide, please. Now, this shows the daily figures for those who have very sadly lost their lives after testing positive for coronavirus. And I think the most interesting feature is the yellow line, the 7-day rolling average, which shows that the daily number of deaths currently stands at 163. That's down from a peak of 943 on the 14th of April. So we're not there yet, we're not out of the woods entirely, but we've made steady progress, and that's the basis, that's the evidence on which we could take the further steps that we took today as we come through this transition along the roadmap that the Prime Minister has set out. That's it from the slides. I think we'll now go to some questions, please. I think we've got, first up, Ollie from Newcastle under Lyme. Hi, Ollie. Can we have that question again? It was on mute, please. Ollie's asking when the UK's alert level will be at 1 or near to 1. Ollie, it's difficult to say for sure. We know it's down below 1. And the critical thing at this stage is as we open up schools, we open up businesses, is that with our test and trace mechanism, we keep a very close eye to make sure that we're controlling the virus and getting it down. We need to make sure we keep suppressing not just the incidence, but the transmission rate. So That's in terms of the R level. And of course, the alert level will follow that. That's decided independently by the Biosecurity Centre, and we'll take their advice on the alert level, but that's not decided by the politicians. Next up, we've got Jude from Eastbourne. And Jude asks, what provision will be put in place for the children of key workers over the summer holidays if the schools won't be open? Our normal plans would be school holiday clubs, grandparents who live out of town, as well as holidays abroad to break up the 7-week summer holiday, and none of those options are currently available. Well, look, I'm sure, Jude, you speak to, for a lot of people. We're working with schools. We've provided extra money for some of the programmes that can be provided over the recess period. Thousands of children will also receive extra support through our holiday activities and food programme, but it will be difficult, and we appreciate that there will be more challenges than we would normally have. But as I said before, as we open up schools and as children come back into using the facilities, and as we look at some of those wider offers that schools can make, we've just got to be really careful that we give schools the lead time to prepare adequately, and also that we take these steps steadily and in a sure-footed way, so we don't see the virus take back hold over the country. Jude, thank you for that. And now I'll go to the media. Mark Easton from the BBC. Mark.
Good evening. Mr. Raab, the Prime Minister's response to the anger of the Black Lives Matter protests is an inquiry in the same unit the previous PM set up to answer the same question. Rather than yet another Whitehall committee, wouldn't it be more helpful to allow us to see immediately the official findings on why people from black and other ethnic minorities are more likely to die from COVID-19?
Well, we do want to get to the bottom of that. We've commissioned more research on it. I think you'd agree that that needs to be handled very sensitively, but we are making sure we get to the bottom of it and got a clear view before we advise the public. We do also think, and the Prime Minister has said, that it's important to set up the new commission on race and ethnic disparities. We want to affect positive change, and I don't accept that this is yet another review on top of the ones that have gone before. We have made progress. It's not enough. We're still restless to bring further change. But the Prime Minister ran his election campaign on a levelling up agenda. He's been talking about this issue, making sure we've got more equal opportunity right across the country, right across all of our communities since he's been Prime Minister, and indeed since the election campaign. And we have also made progress over the last 10 years. We've got a significant increase in the rates of BAME 18-year-olds going to university. Since 2011, we've seen black pupils now 2.5 times more likely to enter core subjects at GCSE. And we're also acting on the Lammy review into the criminal justice system. So we've made progress, but it is important that we make further progress. And that's why the Prime Minister has set up that new commission. Do you want to come back, Mark, on that?
Well, I just wanted to ask you specifically about the details on why it is that black and minority ethnic people are dying in far greater numbers proportionately than white people. I know it's something that worries an enormous number of people from those communities. There are leaked reports going around. Why are some people allowed to see this stuff and we, and indeed ethnic minorities, are not?
Well, Mike, I think you've answered the question yourself. It's not right on a subject this sensitive, where we have not got the bottom of all of the evidence to start leaking snippets of it out. We want to make sure we've got a clearer understanding so that we can communicate it with practical advice for those involved, precisely because it's a very sensitive issue, and we want to give clear and reassuring guidance and not to have different people saying different things. So we will release as much information as we can, as soon as we practically can. But I think it's also important, people will expect that to come with practical advice. So we'll look at this very sensitively and make sure that once the further detail has been disclosed, we can do so with practical guidance and practical advice, which can give that reassurance. Mark, thanks very much. I'll go to Joel Hills at ITN.
Hello there. Mr. Raab, do you agree that the way British Airways is treating its workforce is a national disgrace?
Look, we're going through a really challenging time. The government's provided a huge amount of support for businesses, large and small, and I think it's really important that we pull together and have a united team effort. We've seen that with the way the country feels about key workers, NHS staff and care workers, and I think it's incumbent on all businesses and all employers to try and do the very best they can to see to maintain jobs and see employees through. Of course, it's in the last analysis be for individual employers and businesses to take those judgment calls, but we're certainly urging to keep as many of those jobs in place as possible. Did you want to come back on any of that, Joel?
Ask, if I could, I mean, it doesn't sound as if you have a view one way or another, but I ask because just over 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister told MPs on the liaison committee that he is aware of the situation at British Airways, and he said, we are actively looking at what we can do. What is the government going to do?
Well, we've done a huge amount already. There's been billions of pounds put into the job retention scheme. We provide direct support for businesses, both large and small. There are loan facilities. There are the furlough scheme, of course, as well. So, I mean, we've taken a range of steps. In terms of the airlines specifically, the Chancellor, of course, is looking very carefully at that. And I can tell you that from the Foreign Office's point of view, we put in £75 million into our charter flight scheme, which is primarily aimed at getting British nationals back from being stranded abroad, and that's something that the airlines, 14 airlines, benefited from as well.
Can we just talk about British Airways very specifically? It's a clear question. If you could just answer it, please. What does the government plan to do, if anything, about the situation at British Airways?
Well, Joel, as I'm explaining to you very clearly, step by step, ultimately it will be for businesses to decide how they navigate through this challenge. But as I've set out, we've provided a huge amount of support, and I know that the Chancellor and the Treasury are looking very carefully at all of the vulnerable sectors as we come through what is undoubtedly a very difficult time. Joel, thank you very much. Beth Rigby from Sky.
Thank you. Secretary of State, on the matter of this new Equality Commission, your colleague Nasrat Ghani said today, we have the data on obstacles, prejudice and inequalities. We just need to crack on with real practical solutions which will have a positive impact. But instead of getting on with it and implementing the 250 recommendations you already have from a clutch of reviews, the PM setting up another commission to report in 6 months' time. Can you understand why that might actually anger Black Lives Matter activists rather than reassure them? And on the issue of the 12-metre rule, Health Minister Ed Argar said in the Commons today, the review into that rule will strike the right balance between public health and business. Is that how the government is now approaching things, as a trade-off between public health and the economy?
Yeah, first of all, on the Commission, I think it's about setting a new positive agenda for change. Of course, we look at the work that was done by previous governments, but the Prime Minister's very clear on the direction of travel. We want to make sure we can translate some of the diagnosis of the challenges that we've got with actionable policies. But again, Beth, I'll just bring you back to as I mentioned earlier, in response to the first question that I took, we've seen a significant increase in rates of BAME 18-year-olds going to university. Since 2011, actually, if you look at children from all ethnic minority backgrounds, they're more likely to take most academic subjects at GCSE than they were before. We've got a big improvement in black pupils entering course subjects at GCSE, even more so in relation to Asian pupils. We are making progress. So I do understand the restlessness for change. I think what the Prime Minister wants to make sure with this Commission is that we can come up with actionable policies, not just a diagnosis of the challenges we face. In relation to, I think you meant the 2-metre rule, not the 12-metre rule. Look, the fact is, and I've heard Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance explain it previously, indeed, at these podiums, is there's no magic to one or other particular measure. There will be different levels of risk, whether it's at 2 metres, 1.5 metres or 1 metre. But as we bring the incidence and the transmission rate down, and depending on the setting, it's something that can be looked at. So we're still going to make sure all of the policy judgments that we rightly as politicians take and are accountable for are underpinned by the science. And that's why we've tasked this review to look at it very carefully and to give us some up-to-date practical advice. And I think it's fair to say that based on the steps that we're taking, we've obviously had essential retail open for a while. With the new measures we're taking, what we're learning from international experience abroad, we're finding that the scientific basis is constantly evolving. So what we will do is make sure that we come up with the most up-to-date and the most comprehensive advice we can before we as policymakers take those judgment calls. Do you want to come back on any of that, Beth?
Well, just the only thing is, just in terms of the review, the Commission, lots of people have said today, actually, it's kicking the can down the road. You've had dozens of recommendations, and actually, there are things that need immediate action. Is everything just under review for another 6 months? And do you think that that's enough to persuade people to stop protesting?
Well, I think we understand why people are protesting, and let's remember that people are protesting because of the appalling case of George Floyd and the resonance that they feel that struck with them. We understand that. I thought it was a horrific case. We welcome the fact that prosecutions are being brought, that there's a federal review. And of course, UK is not the same as the United States. We've made progress in lots of ways. We don't have similar number or volume of BAME people who find themselves either being mistreated in custody or in detention, but we know that there are also concerns about the criminal justice system, which is why, as I mentioned, we're already following up on the Lamy review. We're acting on it already, collecting and publishing more data, better data, improving diversity in the prison workforce, working towards incorporating ethnicity when gauging performance of all of those key actors in the criminal justice system. So that work is already underway. And there isn't a silver bullet to this, and you say that why aren't we taking X or Y measures, that you didn't mention one in particular, and that's because this is difficult terrain. But I do think we should take stock of the progress that we've made over time. There was an Ipsos Mori poll out today which said that 66% of people say that the UK will be more tolerant, more diverse in 10 years' time. That's up from 50% in 2009. I think that tells something of the story. We are making progress. We've got every reason to be optimistic that this country will be open to everyone and people can make the very best of their talents based on their potential, not the colour of their skin, their ethnicity, their faith. But clearly, we've still got work to do. So we'll do that painstaking work, even if it takes an extra 6 months, as you described, to make sure that we can really target policy measures where they can make the most difference. Thanks, Beth. And I think next is Jane Merrick from the Eye. Hi, Jane.
Thank you. The member of the public, Ollie, earlier asked a very good question about the alert level. And you said ultimately this was not something that was decided by politicians. It is true, isn't it, that there are only questions that only scientists can answer. And I'm just wondering why you don't have any scientists or medics next to you today. The weekly appearances by scientists and medics at these briefings has halved since the start of June. Why are the appearances by scientists diminishing?
So I think you're right, Jane, to say that the judgment calls we make will inevitably be informed by the science. We're taking a lot of time and effort to get that right and to get the very best scientific information we can. As you'll know, you'll have heard Sir Patrick say it, you'll have heard Professor Chris Whitty say it, the science isn't set in stone, it's constantly evolving, so it is fluid, and that's why we need to constantly monitor it. In terms of presence at these press conferences, I mean, scientists and the chief and deputy medical officers will continue to come and attend these press conferences. I think it is also true to say that as we go down the roadmap and we start to talk about the changes we're making, whether it's to businesses or to schools or in other areas, we'll also bring other independent experts along and make sure that we can answer the full range of questions that people have. Jane, do you want to follow up on any of that?
Well, yes. I mean, it is quite a sort of a crossroads moment this week. And when we have sort of the shops opening up today, questions about the R value and so on. And do you not think it would be more reassuring to have a medic and a science at these daily briefings, which are still watched by millions of people? And there are some questions that you can't answer because you have to refer to the medics.
Well, you haven't tried me on a question that I can't answer yet, but I'm happy to be proved wrong. But look, Jane, you're right to say that the scientists and the medical advisors are important. They'll continue to attend these press conferences, perhaps not on a daily basis. They've got a huge amount of other work to do. And ultimately, the politicians need to answer the judgment calls that we make based on the evolving science. So that's the approach we're taking. Jane, thank you very much. Liz Piper from Reuters.
Hi there.
Hiya.
Hi. In April, you said it wouldn't be business as usual with China after the coronavirus crisis. But even now, over Hong Kong and Huawei, it seems like the tide is already turning. How seriously do you take the warnings from Beijing that China could inflict substantial damage on the British economy?
Liz, I'm not sure I answered your question. We said it wouldn't be business as usual. That's partly about our approach and our diplomacy and our international relations with all countries after coronavirus. I don't think it will be business as usual abroad. It's certainly not at home. And look, in relation to China, there is obviously this fresh review on the 5G situation based on the evolving evidence that we've got. And in relation to Hong Kong, I think we've put out a very clear position, which is that if China follows through on this national security law, it would be in conflict, direct conflict, with the undertakings they've made under the Sino-UK Joint Declaration of 1984. So it doesn't feel to me like that's, strictly speaking, business as usual. But I think it's also true and right to say that we want to have a balanced approach with China. There are opportunities in that relationship, not just on trade, but also on COP26 and in climate change. Really important opportunities to shift the dial and work with China and other leading members of the international community on tackling climate change. That's particularly important to us and to the Prime Minister with COP26 scheduled for next year. At the same time, we're going to rigorously and robustly defend all of our values, as we will over Hong Kong, but also key things like infrastructure and other elements of our economy. Liz, do you want to come back on anything particular?
If I could, yes, please. I mean, it does seem like there's some kind of reset taking place at the moment, and you're trying to balance security concerns with economic prosperity. But I mean, as we go forward, what would you say to HSBC that has basically supported China's new security law in Hong Kong? And when will we actually see the results of the Huawei review?
Well, the review will be ready when it's we've got the full data back from the people that are conducting it, and NSC will need to look at it again. In relation to HSBC, look, ultimately businesses will make their own judgment calls, but let me just put it this way. We will not sacrifice the people of Hong Kong over the altar of banker bonuses. And we've made a historic commitment to the people of Hong Kong to protect their autonomy and to protect their freedoms, and more importantly, so has China. So we will hold them to those responsibilities, and I'll let businesses and banks make their own judgment call. But for us, this is a point of principle, and I think it's right we live up to our historic responsibilities and we stick up for the people and stand up for the people of Hong Kong at this very sensitive time. As you'll know, this isn't a foregone conclusion. China can step back from the brink, and we urge them to do so, and I've spoken to my Chinese opposite number, State Councillor, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and we had a perfectly reasonable discussion, but we've made it very clear our position. Thanks, Liz. Mark Andrews from the Shropshire Star. Mark.
Good evening, Foreign Secretary. Our local MP, Owen Patterson, has said that getting the 2-metre rule down to 1 metre is essential to kickstart our tourism and hospitality industries. I believe that when the Prime Minister announced the review recently, he said that the decision will be made, which it depends on the figures getting down enough. What precisely does this mean? What targets will need to be set, and how close are we to reaching them?
Yeah, thank you very much. Look, you're right, the Prime Minister's commissioned a comprehensive review of the 2-metre rule. It will look at how it works in practice, the scientific evidence. We'll try and learn as much as we can from the international experience, which differs, of course. And in the meantime, I think our message is, as shops reopen, it is very important, and with the minority of scenes that we've seen today, it's important to emphasise that people must continue to keep 2 metres apart wherever possible and follow our stay alert guidance. We expect the review to be completed within the coming weeks, and we'll be able to say more then.
What are the specific targets? What is there a specific measure you've got in mind, and what reassurances can you give to people in the hospitality industry who are concerned that also with the quarantine policies in place and the restrictions on the Welsh border? What assurances can you give to people in the hospitality industry that they will be able to reopen?
Well, look, we've always said, I think, that in terms of bars, restaurants and others in the hospitality sector, we would look at taking further measures. If you look back at the roadmap on the 11th of May, we said that at the earliest, the 4th of July. So the review of the 2-metre rule will inform that. But we want to get those bars, restaurants, all of those small businesses up and running as soon as we can do so, but it's got to be done in a safe and responsible way. So we do need to have the review, we do need to look at the latest evidence, we need to make sure we're gauging the progress that we've made. As I set out in the slides today, we've seen progress across pretty much the entire UK, across all regions, across all the nations, in getting a hold of the virus, bringing it down. If that continues, if we find that the measures that we've already taken, including today, can be done in a careful way, that we don't see the virus spike back up again, I think we'll be in the strongest position to give relief and reassurance to the hospitality sector. But we've got to make sure we proceed in a careful, sure-footed way. We don't want a second spike. That would be bad for public health, bad for the economy, including the small businesses that you've mentioned, and I think it would be bad for public confidence. So we're sticking to the roadmap, but we are making progress, and if we continue to do so, hopefully sooner rather than later, we can provide some reassurance and some further guidance to that sector. Thank you very much, and that brings an end to today's Downing Street press conference.
So there we are. That is the end of that Downing Street coronavirus briefing. The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, there. And amongst other things, the announcement that there have been an additional 38 deaths in the United Kingdom linked to coronavirus, taking the total to 41,736. Let's go to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, who's at Westminster, who's watching and listening to that briefing. And Vicky, quite a lot of questions about the government's promise of another commission, another review of inquiry into racial discrimination in this country, and questions from journalists about, well, we've already had plenty of reviews, plenty of recommendations. Why are we getting yet another one?
Yeah, and I think that is the criticism that there's been, that they have announced this new commission, and yet you've had lots of people getting up and saying, well, actually, we know what the problem is. We've had numerous reports over the years into what needs to be done, and now it does seem to be that it's a question of actually implementing it. Now, Boris Johnson has talked about getting this report by the end of the year. We don't know the parameters of it. We don't know who will be in charge of it. We don't know what the panel will be. So a lot of unanswered questions, and his emphasis today was more on, he said, giving a voice to people from BAME communities who have achieved a lot. And I think you heard that there from Dominic Raab as well, saying, yes, we do understand that there are problems, but also that they want to really talk about some of the progress that has been made. So that's the emphasis that they would prefer. But there are many people we've heard on the airwaves throughout the day who say, look, this has been looked into. They've looked into racism in the workplace, in the criminal justice system. Remember when Theresa May became Prime Minister, she talked about all of that. She wanted to get this racial disparity agenda up and running. So the report is there. People know what the data is. They know what the problems are. The question is, will this report look into policy and changes in policy to see if it actually makes any difference?
And something else the government's having a review into is the 2-metre rule, which it's been under a lot of pressure about, particularly from Conservative backbenchers. Dominic Raab, interesting to hear him say there's no magic to 2 metres, 1.5 metres, 1 metre. It's a judgment call. Just emphasising that in the end this is going to be a political decision as well as a scientific one.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and I think they have, of course, been guided by the science, and that SAGE committee that does advise the government, full of advisors and scientists, they don't all agree either. And we know, because if you look at the World Health Organization, you look at other countries across Europe, for example, they do have different rules. Some are 1.5 metres, some are 1 metre. So in the end, it is going to be up to ministers to decide really how much risk they're willing to take. Yes, there is more of a risk the closer you are, but how much of that are you willing to accept? And particularly, of course, with that date of the 4th of July, where pubs, restaurants and cafes hope that they can open. Of course, many of them don't think it's viable to do so if the 2-metre rule is still in place. So we're told that this is under active review, there's a formal review, but we haven't been told when that will happen. And certainly what these businesses don't want is they don't want to have to prepare, get everything in place for 2 metres, and then it all changes before they start to open, because that, I think, for them would be a real waste of time. And they do, of course, want to be able to open and to be profitable.
OK, Vicky, and apart from the coronavirus briefing, we've had a statement in the Commons, I think, from the Home Secretary about those weekend demonstrations. What's Priti Patel been saying?
Yeah, that's right, and that has been dominating for the last couple of weeks, really, with demonstrations going on all over the country, but of course those scenes, particularly in London, and we've still got the situation where statues are boarded up. We've got the Winston Churchill statue, which is boarded up. So she spoke about that in the Commons in the last hour. This is what she said.
On Saturday, 2,000 people attended counter-protests in Westminster, with eruptions of violence throughout the day. Racists and far-right hooligans clashed with the police, and fights broke out. Smoke bombs, glass bottles were lobbied at the police in shameful scenes. 38 officers were hurt across the country this weekend as they were kicked, punched, or pelted with missiles. On Saturday alone, there were 137 arrests for offences, including assaults on officers, violent disorder, breaches of the peace, possessions of offensive weapons and Class A drugs, and drunk and disorderly behaviour. In total, at least 100 officers have now been injured, as well as 3 police horses and 1 police dog, and at least 280 arrests have been made. As this ugly operational picture demonstrates, many of the so-called protesters came with the deliberate intent of causing harm to those around them and to police officers. This hooliganism is utterly indefensible.
So the Home Secretary there really making it clear that although it's fine to protest, she's saying there that this tipped over into alleged criminal activity, and that of course is much more of a problem, and that's not what the government wants to see. The Home Secretary of course allows the police to get on with the policing of it all, but she's certainly making her own feelings very plain there.
OK, Vicky, thank you. Vicky Young, our chief political correspondent. Well, after 2 weeks of anti-racism protests, the Prime Minister has said he can't ignore the strength of people's feelings. Boris Johnson's announced, as Vicky was telling us, that he is setting up that new commission which will examine all aspects of inequality in the United Kingdom. But at the same time, he also warned against what he called attempts to rewrite the past. Now, critics say that recent events mean that now is the time for action, not yet another review on racial discrimination. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
No peace! No justice! No peace! Whose lives matter? Whose lives matter?
Trafalgar Square in central London this weekend, one of many demonstrations around the country that have now forced a response from the government.
When thousands of people march peacefully for Black Lives Matter, you can't ignore that. I, as a leader, as someone in government, I can't ignore the strength of their feeling. And we have to look at discrimination in the education system, in health, in the criminal justice system. We have to look at all ways in which it affects black and minority ethnic groups.
Parliament Square today, and the statue of Winston Churchill entombed in its protective sheath, as the Prime Minister put it, something he described as miserable in an article in the Daily Telegraph. The statue was protected after it was defaced just over a week ago. Boris Johnson said the growing campaign to edit or Photoshop the entire cultural landscape was something he found dubious. Beyond the row about statues, there's now another row about this Government Inequalities Commission. Some say the Prime Minister's choice of language is unhelpful. Others point to lots of studies that have looked at similar issues where the recommendations have not yet been acted upon. And some wonder just how much thought the Prime Minister has given this.
If he was serious, why are there no details about how it will be staffed? Its remit, its terms of reference, its timetable? That's the question. It's because this was written on the back of a fag packet yesterday to assuage the Black Lives Matter protests. Get on with the action. Legislate, move. You're in government. Do something.
Others point to the long-standing concern that black and minority ethnic people are much more vulnerable to the coronavirus, and a government report about it that, they say, lacked crucial detail.
2 weeks ago, they published that review and there wasn't a single recommendation or plan of action. And now 2 weeks later, here we have the government saying that they are going to confront racism and address racial inequalities in this society when we don't have any recommendations on how they're even going to save the lives of black and ethnic minority people.
Society and government continue to grapple with huge questions about the pandemic and about race. Chris Mason, BBC News.
So, as we heard in that report from Chris Mason then, the Prime Minister announcing that government review into the inequalities experienced by ethnic minorities in the UK. And the Prime Minister has been giving more details, in fact, this afternoon as to how that review will be shaped.
I think what we want to do is learn now very fast what fresh changes we need to make. And what I feel most strongly is that there are so many positive stories that are not being heard, and things really are changing. And you're seeing, young black kids now doing better in some of the most difficult subjects in school than they were ever before. You're seeing more going to top universities. We need to start telling that story and building up a culture of high expectations, of a narrative about success, as well as stamping out the racism and the discrimination that unquestionably exists. So it's two things that I think we need to do at once.
The Prime Minister there speaking this afternoon. We can speak now about all of this to Sara Collins, who's the award-winning novelist who wrote The Confessions of Franny Langton, a novel about a slave who comes over to England in Victorian times and is accused of murdering her mistress. She joins us now from Grand Cayman. Thank you very much for being with us. We're just hearing Boris Johnson there talking about this review he's ordered, saying that actually we need to be talking about the success story of particularly young black people in schools and universities. Would you agree with that?
It's no surprise to me that what Boris Johnson is offering is either deflection or platitudes. I mean, he does not want to engage with the substantive issues. So, of course, the only course of action open to him now is to announce yet another inquiry, instead of acting on the recommendations of previous inquiries, and implore us to look at success stories instead of looking at the substantive difficulties that I suspect he just doesn't want to address.
And we've heard, amongst other people, people like David Lammy, the Labour MP, saying this new review is effectively kicking the can down the road. It was written on the back of a fag packet. Is that how you see it?
Very much so. And the interesting thing is that Boris Johnson's mantra now is that we mustn't rewrite the past. But whenever I hear him say that, what I think is what he means is that we mustn't re-examine his self-serving construction of the past and the construction of the past that is self-serving for people like him. And what he's doing now is buying time. This promise to examine and to learn about issues that have been on his table, quite frankly, since he took office, is nothing more than an empty gesture.
He's written about statues. He's written about warning against attempts to what he called Photoshop Britain's cultural landscape. In particular, he's written about Winston Churchill's statue, saying that it's the height of lunacy to accuse Winston Churchill of racism. Where do you stand on this whole argument about statues? Of course, we saw the statue of the slave trader Edward Colston torn down in Bristol, and that has sparked a whole debate about Britain's cultural heritage.
I was ecstatic to see Colston tipped into the harbour. I described it as our Boston Tea Party. It's the symbolism of the statues coming down is just as important for some people as the symbolism of them coming up and going up. And the one thing I learned after writing my own historical novel is that history itself is an act of photoshopping. The question is, who is doing the photoshopping? And one thing that I've been very firm on since I wrote that novel is that it's time for us to tell the truth about British history. Confronting that truth is the only path to reconciliation, and it's why it's so important to re-examine it and to interrogate it, and to embrace the idea that we're going to start looking accurately at what these supposedly great men really did.
But there is an argument, I've heard this said many times, that actually pulling down statues, talking about statues, debating statues, is in the end a bit of a distraction from the deeper issues about talking about inadequate opportunity for black and Asian and minority ethnic people in employment, in education, in healthcare. Those are the deeper, more important issues, and they are being, in a sense, overridden by the debate over cultural heritage.
I worry about that too. I mean, let's not diminish the importance of statues. It is hugely significant that we have the descendants of slaves still living in the shadows of the statues which are glorifying the achievements of slave traders. But we have bigger fish to fry. And I do worry that if we're distracted by debating whether or not these statues should be left up, then we're not frying those fish. And the other problem is that, of course, these statues galvanize the kind of racist thugs who we've seen coming out this weekend and completely detract attention from putting our heads down and figuring out how we fix the actual problems.
Sarah Collins, good to talk to you. Very clear line from Grand Cayman, so thank you very much for being with us on BBC News.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, some secondary pupils in England facing exams next year have returned to school today for face-to-face time with their teachers. Government guidelines only permit a quarter of the chosen year groups, 10 and 12, to be on site at any particular time. Dan Johnson has been to one school in South East London to see how they're learning to cope there.
Taking the register now means taking temperatures too. But this is only a quarter of 2 year groups, the pupils who face exams next year.
I haven't been here for like 3 months and it's just weird to be back.
I'm glad to be back because I get to see all my mates today, innit? So yeah, it's cool, I don't mind it.
It's been hard trying to learn at home and it's better being back so you can like see everyone again and all the teachers.
Feels very different and sort of the screening at the school gate is something that is obviously new for lots of us, but hopefully this will reassure everyone that we can come back to school safely.
And welcome to a first ever when it comes to assemblies.
A virtual assembly is a natural extension of online learning.
We're also joining hundreds of students at home who will be watching this via our daily stream.
And we're going to start by looking at some of our health and safety.
Here the timetable's unchanged, but just a handful of each class will be in each day, with the rest joining from home. There are calls for more laptops and better broadband connections to make sure everyone benefits.
My only concern is that there will be uniform provision across the country in terms of safety, that the schools that are difficult, the ones that are in a category maybe in special measures or require improvement, that they are operating at the same level in terms of safety and quality of provision.
And here they worry about the small percentage who haven't been logging in getting left behind.
You know, there's been some engagement from those harder to reach students, but the next steps in terms of students returning to school, for me, is the principle of this academy, that 8% are the priority students that ought to be returning to school next.
So these classrooms could be busy over summer to help catch up. More space and older children makes bringing in more secondary year groups easier than filling primary schools again. But where to put everyone and who will teach them are still big questions. Then there are exams, next moves, futures that are up in the air.
I want to be here for longer, like I want to do more days here now, but it's only once a week.
We've been set work online, so we shouldn't be behind if you do the work online. So.
And have you been doing it?
Most of it, yeah.
Dan Johnson, BBC News, Bexley Heath.
Officials in China are placing restrictions on people's movements inside Beijing after a cluster of coronavirus cases linked to a large wholesale food market. It sparked fears of a second wave, with the city reporting 36 new cases, bringing the total of new infections there to 79 over 4 days. Our correspondent Stephen McDonnell reports for us now from Beijing.
Residents in large parts of southwestern Beijing are again behind fences, with fears that a second wave of the coronavirus could take hold. Housing estates have been sealed off to all but those who live there. Deliveries must be made to the perimeter fence only. Shops, schools and some public transport have been closed.
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried. I came to Beijing on the 13th. If this was 1 day later, then I definitely wouldn't be able to come. Right now, there aren't many people on the subway. There aren't as many as before.
In Beijing today, dozens of new confirmed coronavirus infections have been added to the tally, which has been growing since the end of last week. It may not sound like many, but it's caused quite some concern, especially when you consider from where the cluster has emanated. The massive Shinfadi wholesale market, responsible for 80% of the city's vegetables and meat, has been shut for cleaning and testing. All the infections in this cluster have been traced back to the market in some way. Chinese officials say they're hoping to test up to 200,000 people who visited Shinfadi in the last 2 weeks, as well as 90,000 residents.
In the response to Beijing's cluster, we're seeing the best and worst of China's Communist Party. On the one hand, the speed and the scale of the social isolation of the testing has been something to behold. On the other, the party's also being criticised for going after scapegoats, for dismissing local officials on whose watch the outbreak occurred. If you wanted to guarantee a culture whereby cover-up was your first choice rather than open reporting, there's probably not a better way to do it. Stephen McDonald, BBC News, Beijing.
BP has said it may not bring some of its oil fields into production as planned because it believes the coronavirus pandemic will speed up the shift to a low-carbon economy. Demand for oil has plummeted during the lockdown and the price has collapsed. Our business correspondent Simon Gompert has this report.
Is this a sign of the big turning point for oil? Rigs, equipment, property, as well as the oil itself, are worth much less if the market changes permanently. Bernard Looney, BP's new chief executive, has been working on a plan for the company to achieve net zero for its own carbon emissions by 2050. That shows the pressure to change, and now the coronavirus has prompted a big fall in the current oil price.
BP is thinking or forecasting that the price of oil will remain relatively low for the next 20, 30 years to 2050. And interestingly, they are also applying it to the value of their assets.
The price of Brent crude oil from the North Sea is $38 a barrel at the moment, little more than half its level before the crisis. What BP is saying is that even if it recovers, it'll only be to an average of $55 in the long run, 30% less than it expected before. The result, a likely charge of up to £13.8 billion to its accounts to reflect the cost. The low price now is the result of drivers not filling up. But longer term, it's the impact of the Paris Climate Agreement signed 4 years ago to keep down global average temperatures by reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, for instance, by burning oil.
The reality is, if we're going to respond to the climate emergency that we're facing, there is no way that the oil that all of these companies hold, particularly BP, is going to be worth what they thought it was.
It's only a week since BP said it would cut 10,000 jobs worldwide because of the current crisis. Now it faces a challenging pivot towards renewables and what may be an end to easy profits from what used to be called black gold. Simon Gompertz, BBC News.
The search is being carried out for the pilot of a US Air Force fighter jet which has crashed into the North Sea. The F-15C Eagle aircraft was from the 48th Fighter Wing at RAF Lakenheath. It was on a routine training mission with one pilot on board and it crashed shortly after 9:40 this morning while on a training mission. The plane's wreckage has been found. Rescuers are continuing to search for the pilot. So just to recap what we heard from the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, at today's coronavirus government briefing. Let's remind ourselves then of the key points. And thousands of people have flocked to shops in England today, which were reopened for the first time in almost 3 months. The Foreign Secretary stressed that the government had to take a careful approach to reopening the economy, due, he said, to the risk of a second spike if we are not very careful at this moment in time. On the 2-metre social distancing rule, Dominic Raab quoted the government's chief medical and scientific advisors, who have said there is no magic rule on distancing. Mr. Raab said that as coronavirus cases continue to fall and depending on the setting, shorter distancing rules may be appropriate. And he held the daily news briefing alone today. He was not flanked by either the medical or scientific advisors, but he insisted that ministers will continue to be informed by the science behind the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, the BBC's Mark Easton asked the Foreign Secretary why we weren't being allowed immediately to see the results of an inquiry into why so many more people from BAME communities are more likely to die from COVID-19.
Well, we do want to get to the bottom of that. We've commissioned more research on it. I think you'd agree that that needs to be handled very sensitively, but we are making sure we get to the bottom of it and got a clear view before we advise the public. We do also think, and the Prime Minister has said, that it's important to set up the new commission on race and ethnic disparities. We want to affect positive change, and I don't accept that this is yet another review on top of the ones that have gone before. We have made progress. It's not enough. We're still restless to bring further change. But the Prime Minister ran his election campaign on a levelling up agenda. He's been talking about this issue, making sure we've got more equal opportunity right across the country, right across all of our communities since he's been Prime Minister, and indeed since the election campaign. And we have also made progress over the last 10 years. We've got a significant increase in the rates of BAME 18-year-olds going to university. Since 2011, we've seen black pupils now 2.5 times more likely to enter core subjects at GCSE. And we're also acting on the Lammy review into the criminal justice system. So we've made progress, but it is important that we make further progress, and that's why the Prime Minister has set up that new commission. Do you want to come back, Mark, on that?
Well, I just wanted to ask you specifically about the details on why it is that black and minority ethnic people are dying in far greater numbers proportionately than white people. I know it's something that worries an enormous number of people from those communities. There are leaked reports going around. Why are some people allowed to see this stuff and we, and indeed ethnic minorities, are not?
Well, Mike, I think you've answered the question yourself. It's not right on a subject this sensitive, where we have not got the bottom of all of the evidence to start leaking snippets of it out. We want to make sure we've got a clearer understanding so that we can communicate it with practical advice for those involved, precisely because it's a very sensitive issue, and we want to give clear and reassuring guidance and not to have different people saying different things. So we will release as much information as we can, as soon as we practically can. But I think it's also important, people will expect that to come with practical advice. So we'll look at this very sensitively and make sure that once the further detail has been disclosed, we can do so with practical guidance and practical advice, which can give that reassurance.
The Foreign Secretary there at today's government briefing. Weather time now. Let's get a forecast from Chris Fawkes.
Hello again. Low pressure over the weekend brought a mixture of sunshine and showers. Now, in some of those really heavy downpours, some of our weather watchers actually captured some spectacular scenes like these, combining both thunderstorms and rainbows at the same time. And with the same area of low pressure with us throughout the week ahead, there'll be further opportunities for seeing scenes like these. Now, this afternoon, this evening, we'll see some of the heaviest showers across western parts of the UK. So Wales, the northwest Midlands, northwest England and Northern Ireland. The downpours, well, at the heaviest, capable of bringing around 15 to 25 millimetres of rain in the space of an hour. How much is that? Well, it's enough to cause some localised surface water flooding issues. Now, those showers do tend to fade away overnight, so many of us will have dry conditions. But again, it will turn rather cloudy around some of our North Sea coasts to end the night. Temperatures on the mild side, 12 or 13 degrees. That low cloud taking a while to burn back towards those eastern coasts. Otherwise, sunny spells coming through during the morning tomorrow, and heavy showers and thunderstorms for tomorrow afternoon and evening time. This time the heaviest showers again for the west, so parts of southwest England, Wales, northwest England, and running into western areas of Scotland. Similar amounts of rain, 15 to 25 millimetres from the biggest of these storms. So again, we could see some further localised surface water flooding issues. Aside from the showers, some of us will have a dry day with some sunshine, and where that sunshine comes out, it will feel pleasantly warm. Now for Wednesday, our low pressure is still on the charts, so again we've got further showers in the forecast. The showers tending to be a little bit further southwards this time, so Wales, the Midlands, southern counties of England, that's where we'll see the heaviest showers on Wednesday. Further northwards for Northern Ireland and Scotland, fewer showers and some more in the way of dry weather coming through for the middle part of the week. Now, towards the end of the week, we've got a weather front that's going to try and sneak its way in from Europe, and this could bring some lengthier outbreaks of rain for some of us across England and Wales. Pressure's a little bit higher further north, so that will tend to settle the weather down. England and Wales, rain or thundery showers then to end the week, so it's an unsettled end to an unsettled week. Further north for Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland, the weather should improve. It should become a little bit drier with some bright or sunny spells coming through and still warm where we see that sunshine break through the cloud. That's your weather.